Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is a series of recorded conversations between myself, Mike Hutchinson, a game designer, and this chap, Glenn Ford, also a game designer. We are talking, as we always do, about the craft of designing better miniature games. Glenn, have you been designing a miniature game recently, and would you like to tell me about it?
I have, and I think I will.
All right, excellent.
So I think we'll do a little set of conversation about what we're working on at the moment. So
Okay.
a game I'm working on at the moment is, well, at the moment I'm calling it Crash TV at the moment. And what's unusual about this beastie is that it is a co-op miniatures game. So it's built, so it's a post-apocalyptic TV show. I think ages ago I showed you like a handwritten version of this, and I've come back to it and I've kicked it around a bit because it wasn't in a good shape.
Gentle listener, I recall the Glenn before the word processing era, which was weirdly about 4 years ago for Glenn. So yeah, I still have a handwritten A4 line sheet for this.
And I remember you being, funnily enough,
post-apocalyptic TV show though, Glenn.
Well, funnily enough, so I had this idea, and then
he's going to claim precedence.
I mean, you claiming precedence to the idea of post-apocalyptic death TV shows that you were secretly prior to Running Man,
Schwarzenegger and
Race 2000 and all that. Okay, so
I mean, even Car Wars, like the main competitor. Let's be real here.
One of the funny things is I wrote this game, and then for some reason I put in a bunch of like more party game and dexterity game mechanics. I thought it would appeal to you, and you hated them. And I was like, fine, whatever. And I stuffed it in a folder. And then I was I've been pitching around, and somebody asked for some co-op miniatures games. So I pulled this thing out, and I was like, okay, this is actually a cool, interesting idea. So one of the central parts of the meat of the idea is there's a co-opable pickup miniatures game. So you can turn up with your sort of little built guy, and you can find a scenario, and then you play co-op to get through the particular scenario. So it has a few principles. First of all, you have a little bit of action programming at the start of each round. So you use normal deck of playing cards for random number generation and movement programming, and you stack those cards and you flip them, and each turn you put a new card on the bottom. So you've got a couple of cards sort of pre-programmed, and they designate how you're going to move, and you've got basically guns that affect the other player, and mostly they allow you to move through obstacles if they hit you. When you move, you leave a sort of little after effect behind you, and so long as something hits between the first point of the after effect and your final position, it counts as hitting you. So the idea of that
is so it's sort of like Takeshi's Castle meets Tron vibe going on.
So yeah, so something about that. So basically it boils down to you've got to get to these points around the tabletop and deactivate them. They have barriers that you can't pass through. So the only way you can pass through those barriers is by moving in the way of the shot that's coming in from the other player, and that shot will pull you through the barrier, so you can then interact with the thing that you need to turn off. So the idea is you're running along.
So you're blind from each other programming moves, but you still have to choreograph something.
Exactly, yeah. So it has a limited communication rules of, so like during the programming phase, you can say things like, I'm moving early north, and that's about all you're allowed to say. And then the timing of the card, the number on the cards is when you go in the particular turn. And so the idea is, so like one guy will have like a grapple gun that essentially fires a little parachute and a grappling hook into you, so it pulls you towards him in the air, so you go over obstacles. And there's a blaster version that knocks people away, and then there's a little phase gun and a disintegrator. And so you need to figure out what the other person's doing, because if you fire your grappler, it doesn't hit them, it's completely useless. and if they move before or after you thought and you don't get the shot. So it's about coordinating physical movement on the tabletop between two players with limited communication in a miniatures tabletop game. So that's what I'm kicking around at the moment.
Cool.
It's interesting because sort of
that sounds like, because I think we'll probably have another conversation rather soon about whether or not you can design randomness out. Does randomness make a strong feature of this game? Because it feels like whether or not the like grappling hook with the parachute hits the opposing player should be 100% down to our communication and skill, and 0% down to did I roll a 5 up on a dice.
Yeah, so it doesn't have a lot of randomness in it. Certainly, so for example, when you hit somebody with a grapple gun, the distance they get moved is dependent on the card that you used to fire the grapple gun with. So that one's like pre-predicted. But one of the guns is the disintegrator that just destroys obstacles, but it destroys an obstacle a random distance from you. So that requires way less coordination, but it might just be totally useless because is disintegrating somebody at something outside of the studio and things like that. So there is some randomness in it. There's not a massive amount of randomness. And also because I think the main point is because it has a little bit of programming. When you get damaged in the game, you lose a card off of your programming stack. And if you lose too many cards, you are flipping cards and being randomly programmed. So you have like a stack of 2 cards at the start of the game. Every time you get hurt by something, you discard one of those cards off. You can take actions to stack extra cards. If you lose that stack, instead of using your pre-programmed stack cards, you flip a card randomly off your deck of cards, and that programs you for that particular turn. So you can gain control again if you can get like a bit of a rest and program again. So that's one point, because in my opinion, every programming game should have the potential for a point where you're just blundering around in, completely. There's always the potential for you to miss your programming and just end up running into a wall like a complete buffoon. But also if things go badly wrong, you are going to just absolutely robo rally it into a corner and cry. So that is the main bit.
Are there like lasers and traps and things that can take health off you, presumably, and you can fall from things if you do it wrong? Or
yeah, so if you fail to sort of make the bits you've got to get to work, they electroshock you, and that electroshock goes up each time you fail. And if you run into a wall because you misjudged your programming, that hurts you. And at the moment I'm trying to figure out alternative shows, because Crash TV, for those of us who were digital gaming back in the 90s, is a definite reference to Smash TV, the classic twin stick shooter. And I want to be able to do a thing that has a bit of like, there are creatures around and you've got to kill the creatures. But I'm trying to figure out a way of doing that requires coordination, but is still fun and kills a lot of things. So at the moment,
there's a few things coming together in my brain. It might be because of the sequence of conversations that we're putting together as this month. So one thing that I'm really intrigued about, and I'm wondering how you're tackling this, because it sounds to me like the puzzle element of trying to get to that central thing through the barriers and stuff, like you're going to have to design that level. You're going to have to tell the players how to lay that thing out, right? Is that do you provide a little map for like where the objectives are and where the barriers are and of what type they are, or do you let them just set the puzzle up for themselves?
So that is a very interesting question. So on one of the first iterations, there were a set of, frankly, quite complex, very logical and machine language appropriate rules for laying out a series of these barriers to create a growingly difficult level. So it started like with a few barriers, and each turn you put in sort of more barriers, and it would get more and more complicated, and you need to use more and more of your shots to get around it. And then I've been going back and forth through this process saying, okay, what level of difficulty does it create where you say, okay, there are like 5 of these nodes on the table in basically a number 5 figure, and each of them has walls around them. And fundamentally, to get through one wall, you need to coordinate with another person a set of angles and lines, you know, whilst moving.
I think this is where it's interesting. It's like, because I think I can immediately see a couple of different directions you could take this, like from a product design perspective. It's like, is this actually like a small set of rules with a lot of puzzles, and each of these, like, you know, we basically roll at random or we choose the next puzzle, and it's like, well, we've completed, you know, 12 of the 30 different puzzles that Glenn has laid for me, and you've asked me to create 4 or 5 pieces of predictable terrain, and maybe you've even provided the like silhouettes of them so I can cut them out and make sure that when I stick my matchboxes on top of them, they're the right size, and then you provide all the layouts, because that would be much more like a kind of like a casual mobile game or something, where like once you've learned the key mechanic, that's cool, and then just the application of those mechanics gets more and more devilish in its subtlety or its irritation. Because the problem is, if you just lay them out in the same way and sort of let the players continue to enjoy that, it'll be like, you know, they'll learn by rote essentially like the right selection of cards, and there will just be an obvious solution. But then in the other direction, because you've said that it's a co-op game, I sort of feel like there's an option that's maybe off the table, which maybe could be on the table, which is, what if it was a 4-player game that was more like Rocket League, and like it's always you've got a box and I've got a box, and we get a certain number of barriers that we can set up in whatever way we want, and then me and you have to try and knock the other guy's boxes off, and they're trying to battle, and then there's a sort of tug of war thing, base defense thing.
Yeah,
could be fun.
Yeah, no, very much the sorts of thoughts that I'm running through in this bit of sort of development. So where I'm at the moment is that I think obviously figuring out how to make co-op work in a tabletop miniatures game is inherently, I think, sort of an interesting and tricky, squishy little problem, without having loads of like AI enemies and you're just killing off AI enemies. And that was quite sort of central to me with this game. I wanted it to be, and there's nothing wrong with,
and that's why, as you started to mention introduction of like enemies, aliens that you have to splat, like my heart sank a little bit. Like, I mean, I know that you probably tackle it in an interesting way, but like that almost depurifies the sort of the thing you're selling me.
No, absolutely. But the thing that I'm trying to do, the point of the aliens is that all of your weapons are non-lethal. So you've got like a grapple gun.
Right. So they become like semi-autonomous terrain.
So shooting someone with one grapple gun doesn't hurt them. You need to shoot somebody with 2 grapple guns from different directions in order to hurt them. Yeah,
Gotcha.
It will hurt them, and so the enemies don't have any kind of like AI. They walk mindlessly, like in straight directions. They don't really attack you or anything.
Right, maybe they just do guard pathing or something.
And the question is, it's like, okay, there's something fun about coordinating to try and both hit a moving object from 2 different directions, like with guns, when you're not allowed to communicate. And there's that question of, that's not Smash TV, which is a game that I do like and I want to reference. How much do I care about that? How much do I want to have this different sort of fun in the game? And so at the moment there's this little thing of like, okay, where's the soul of the game, going on? And there is that. I'm sort of in the middle of tweaking around those sorts of things and figuring out those episodes, but I'm liking it. It's fun. I think it does a cool thing, and I'm enjoying knocking around some unusual ideas as I
guess the other thing, and this is less important from an indie game perspective, but might be important to your prospective publisher / just is interesting in general, is like how how does that get me excited about the hobby aspect? Like, in what ways? I'm not suggesting it doesn't, but like, in what ways does it hook into my hobby urges? And is that one dude enough? Like, is there a campaign system so that he gets better? And like, why do I care about this one little mini? And do I paint more of them? And do I have to bring special terrain? Like, what's going on there? Like, how does this come to life?
Yeah. So I've been having this conversation with somebody, and it is a sort of, on the one hand, it is like one, or you're going to need like one or two sort of heroes, but they are not the usual minis that you inherently have in your collection. So there is the thing of, okay, well, we now have an option to provide people with a mini that they almost certainly don't have, and is a very specific individual. And there is, I personally think there's a value to particularly indie hobby games that try to get you to pick up one or two minis, but they're one or two minis that you almost certainly don't already have. And yeah, the terrain is another thing, and figuring out, a game that doesn't require a lot of big terrain, but requires quite a lot of very simple, 4-inch walls, basically, is another thing that's a tricky question. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, I can happily provide you with a picture of a 4-inch wall, and you can print out as many as you like and put them on the tabletop. And then it's like, I've been cutting up Warhammer movement trays because they have sort of a paneled appearance to them, and they look a lot like the Portal walls, the walls from Portal. And I like the idea that, like in Portal, as soon as you go behind one of those walls, it's all shonky and poorly put together. I like the idea that just on the edge of the TV studio, it's absolute crap and looks terrible. So, but figuring out product lines is a thing that is in my head at the moment about some designs, which we might well have a little chat about in an upcoming
that sounds good. I also want to know, like, is there any kind of list building in this, and how
there
does
is.
that...
Yeah, there's a little list building because you've got 2 hands worth of stuff, one of which is a weapon, one of which is like a utility ability, and you've got a set of stats. I mean, I'm not sure that it's in a particularly worthy place at the moment, but I'm always happy to get feedback and early beta play testing. So we might
nice to get a peek behind the curtain, Glenn. Very interesting.
There might well be a link in the show notes for this conversation where people can take a look at the very, very early still work in progressy thing that is currently Crash TV.
And if you do, gentle viewer, please write extremely mean and critical things on it, because that's what Glenn always does to my designs.
Constructive feedback can be harsh, but it's always welcome. So there might well be a link to it, so check out the show notes. And yes, I'm sure we're going to have a conversation in a relatively short time about the process of going through product design for an independent design. But for now, I think we will sign off on this little conversation about my little project. If you've watched you to this point, please do like and subscribe, and please do get into the comments section and check out the link that's there to a half-written but weird and hopefully interesting game, and give your opinions about how insane I am to be following that particular rabbit down its hole, or whether you want me to succeed in that battle because you want to engage with it. And if you get on the tabletop, God bless you, let me know how badly it falls to pieces halfway through a game. Any comments are very welcome, as they always are. Let us know if you're working on a project of your own, particularly if you're fiddling with the idea of co-op design in tabletop miniatures games. We love to hear about your own designs. I know loads of people who watch this channel are working on their own games, just as we are. So let us know how your own struggles are going, and if this answers some questions that you're grappling with in your own designs. Get to us in the comments section.
Ask some more questions.
I mean, it's always better to ask more difficult and upsetting questions than to actually answer any of them. That's very much our raison d'etre here. So drop us in the comment section, hit us up on social media. But for now, from this episode of Rule of Carnage, I think it's going to be goodbye. So goodbye, bye.
Bye.
Bye.